We got about halfway through this chapter the last time, and you'll recall that Jesus had left and come down to the western shore. Again, in my mind, I can see this. Ma'am said she's going to get me a map, but I can see it clearly in my mind. But the Sea of Galilee here, and Magdala and Dalmanutha were over here on this western side of the central side of the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus has left there, and he's gone to Bethsaida on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, into a less populated area. And it's there in this less populated area that he's teaching, and people have been with him for 3 days, and they've been so enthralled with his teaching and with what was going on that they hadn't eaten for 3 days. And so when it came time to send them away, Jesus said, I have compassion on them. I don't want to send them away, without eating. And so they said, we don't have anything here but 7 loaves, which were basically dinner rolls, probably elongated type dinner rolls or sub rolls, something to that effect. You'll recall in the little boy's lunch he had 5 loaves, so 7 loaves was not much for 4,000 people this time. And they said, we have a few small fish as well. So he said, tell everybody to sit down, and Jesus fed them all. And when they got done, this time they took up 7 baskets full of fragments, or 7 baskets full of leftovers, scraps from what the people had eaten, from 7 loaves and a few small fish, which is incredible to think about, that you'd have that little bit and then have 7 baskets full. You'd think people would notice that, but the disciples didn't notice that, and they didn't notice the feeding of the 5,000. They just, for whatever reason, they just didn't see it. And so after he had fed the 4,000, Jesus and the disciples got ready to leave to go back to the other side, and he was going. Let's see. At this particular time, he's going up to Bethsaida. So let me see where I'm at here. I think it's verse 22. It says, and he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. Okay, and so he's now still over here on this one side of the Sea of Galilee. He comes to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and he besought him to touch him. In between this, let me go back and explain that after they had gotten on the boat, they realized they didn't take any food with them, and I don't know what happened to the 7 baskets full of leftovers, but for whatever reason they didn't have, and they searched the boat, and they found one loaf. And they were all, sort of looking at each other like, all right, who was supposed to pick up the food? And in the middle of that's when Jesus said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. They immediately, because he mentioned leaven, began to think in physical terms and thought about bread, because bread had leaven in it. And only on special occasions did they leave out the leaven. There was religious reasons for that. But he said, beware of the leaven. So they thought he was talking about the bread. And Jesus said, how is it you think I'm talking about bread? He said, do you remember the 5,000? He said, what did you have? 5 loaves and 2 small fish? And he said, how many baskets full of fragments did you have left over after you fed them from that little boy's lunch? I said, 12. Do you hear yourself? You had 12 baskets full of leftovers and fed 5,000, and all you had to start with was a little boy's lunch. Then he said, when you fed the 4,000, how much did you have left over? And they said, well, we had 7 loaves, 7 baskets full left when we were done. And he says, but you started out with a few small loaves and a few small fish, and you ended up with 7 baskets full of leftovers. He made them say it. So he said, how is it you don't understand that you just witnessed miracles of supplying? So I'm not worried about whether I can supply physical needs or whether we're going to starve to death. But what he was concerned about when he talked about the leaven of the Pharisees was leaven came to symbolize corruption, because when you had Passover, you couldn't have leaven in your house. You not only could not have it in your bread, you couldn't have it in your house. They would go through a process of sweeping the house, looking for any possible leaven there, because leaven, defiled the Passover. And so it came to symbolize corruption, and not just corruption, but like leaven spreads out, it came to symbolize sin and how it spreads out. And so he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, that corruption that they try and put into you that will spread and defile you, just like leaven defiles a piece of Passover bread, or the Passover celebration. And so Mark doesn't go into any detail to talk about what he was talking about when he said the leaven of the Pharisees, but in Matthew and Luke's account, it mentions that he was talking about their doctrine and their hypocrisy. Their doctrine and their hypocrisy. Beware of their hypocrisy. And their doctrine was built on hypocrisy. It was built on the idea of how they looked to others, but not really having anything inside. Remember, Jesus said, you're like whited sepulchres. You look good on the outside, whitewashed like a tomb, but on the inside it's just full of decay and death. And so everything the Pharisees did, they did for to be seen of men. Jesus said in one place, in talking about their doctrine, he said, do what they say, but don't do as they do, for they say one thing and they do another. So their whole doctrine was built on hypocrisy. He said, don't let that be you. Don't let it be an outward show. Don't be something that you say you are and are not, but let it be something that comes from your heart. Let it be something that you're true to God from your inner core. And so in verse 22 it says, and he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him and besought him to touch him. So now they bring this blind man to Jesus, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. So when they brought the blind man, you remember we talked about the guy who was deaf and mute, and Jesus had taken and spit and put his fingers in his ears and then spit and touched his tongue, and these unusual things that Jesus did with that. But they had asked Jesus to do the same thing for him. They besought him to touch him. That's what they wanted. But instead of touching him, he did this unusual thing of sticking his fingers in his ears and spitting and touching his tongue. Which, you can see it would have been unusual for him to do. So here they ask him, all right, they bring this blind man, they said, okay, touch him, lay hands on him, and he'll be well. And instead, Jesus leads him aside, away from the crowd, because once again, the crowds are so great. How's he going to get anywhere if they see this miracle of healing? So he leads the guy astray, or leads the guy away from them, out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, now he does another unusual one. He spits in the guy's eyes and put his hand upon him and asked him if he saw aught. He had spit on his eyes. I can't help but think that he's doing this as a test of the man's faith and obedience, right? Remember when Naaman in the Old Testament came to, because the Israelite slave had told him there was a prophet that could heal him of his leprosy, could help him get healed from his leprosy. And so he had come down to find Elisha the prophet, and Elisha wouldn't even come out, but said, tell him to go wash 7 times in the Jordan River. And his initial reaction was he got mad. He said, we've got wonderful rivers back home that are cleaner than Jordan, and he won't even come out, and he's telling me to go wash. Finally, his servant said to him, if he'd asked you to do a difficult thing, you'd have done it. All he told you to do was go. And he humbled himself and did it. And when he did what the prophet said, on the 7th time he was healed. Well, it was a test of the man's faith. It was a test of the man's humility. This big soldier, you're going to do it. Maybe in these cases with what he's doing to this deaf man, what he's doing to this blind man, in this particular case, maybe this is another situation of do you want it enough? Do you believe it enough? Are you humble enough to receive it? Because it's, you just laying your hands on me, now I'm going to spit in your eyes. That'd be pretty hard to accept, somebody spitting in your eyes, right? Now, one commentator said maybe Jesus was taking and symbolizing the cleansing of his eyes. But whatever the case is, we can only speculate as to why Jesus did it. Again, it's another example of God may answer your prayer, but not the way you ask for him to answer that prayer. he may do it a little different. And so he put his hands upon him, and he asked him if he saw aught or anything. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. Now this is another really unusual miracle here. Do you see? He says, all right, do you see anything? Well, naturally, Jesus has got the power to heal him, right? But the man, instead of seeing clearly, he says, I see men as trees. Now that's a miracle, because he couldn't see anything before, but now he could see men as trees. That leads me to believe, like the deaf man, that maybe this blind man had saw at one time, because he somehow knew what a tree looked like, right? I see men as trees. But obviously men don't, in my mind I'm thinking they're blurry and elongated, you know. I see it. But I want to point out to you that a miracle did happen. He saw nothing. Now he does see something. It's just not clear. And I've often looked at that and thought, well, why did Jesus not heal him in just one touch? It says, and after he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. So it took 2 touches. I don't think Jesus does anything by accident. Now, some speculate maybe the man's faith can only go so far. I don't really think so. I think that there's a reason to why Jesus is doing this. Why does he heal this man partially, then touch him again and heal him completely? And I heard somebody say it a while back, years ago, and I tend to agree with it. I think he's giving a visible example of something he's about to do with the disciples here in just a moment. He's about to have a discussion with them, and it's going to play back to this man. So I want to emphasize to you, first of all, the man's totally blind. Jesus touches him one time. Now he can see, but not clearly. And he touches him again, then he sees clearly. Right? So it's sort of nothing, something, everything. All right? So after he put his hands upon him again, he made him look up when he was restored and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town and tell it to any in the town. So go home, don't say anything. Well, it's obvious eventually the man's going to come out of his house, right? And people are going to see this man that's blind and know that, all right, he was blind, how's he seeing? And word's going to get out. But it's almost as though Jesus is saying, go there and wait until I can get out of here, right? So if you go into town, you tell everybody, it's going to be a mass chaos here. So go home. Now, eventually it's going to come out, but this will give Jesus time to get away. And so it says in verse 27, and Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi. Now, again, if you can imagine the Sea of Galilee here, Jesus is headed up north. I mentioned to you about Jesus going as furthest north when he went to near Tyre and Sidon and met up with a Syrophoenician woman who begged him for her daughter, and he said it's not right to give the children bread to dogs. That was over on this side, in the northwestern side of Israel. Jesus is now going to the northeasternmost point in his ministry. He's on his way toward the city. He doesn't go all the way to it, but to the towns to the south of it, just south of Tyre. He goes to just south of the city called Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was built by Herod Philip. I'm thinking, if I'm not incorrect on this, that was Herodias's first husband, and this was his territory up here. And he had built Caesarea, naming it for Caesarea. You know, he's naming it, but there's already a Caesarea, right? That's more popular and more well known. That's over on the Mediterranean. So, in order to distinguish it, he added his name, Herod Philip, and called it Caesarea Philippi. Philippi for Philip. You know, when we talk about the Philippians, that Philip, it was named after a Philip also, but that was named after Alexander the Great's father, Philip. But this one was named after Caesar, and named after Herod Philip, Caesarea Philippi. So Jesus is coming to these towns just south of Caesarea Philippi. By the way, he asked his disciples, saying unto them, whom do men say that I am? Okay, so now he's coming to the question, all right, I've been here a little while, who do people say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist. Some think, just like Herod thought, you're John the Baptist raised from the dead. His ministry was similar to John's. Maybe this is John, and John's been raised from the dead. They answered him, they say you're John the Baptist, but some say you're Elias or Elijah. Because the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, promised that before the Messiah came, Elijah would return. And that Elijah would come and prepare the way of the Lord. And that's going to come into play here in the next chapter as well, that prophecy. But some think that you're Elijah. You've come here to prepare the way for the Messiah. And they also thought that about Elijah because Elijah and Elisha were the only two real prophets of the Old Testament. Well, they weren't the only two, but they were more well known than any of the others for doing miracles. And so since Jesus was doing miracles, maybe this is Elijah come back. Because Elijah did miracles. And others say you're one of the prophets, or I think one of them says, or as one of the prophets. So they may have thought it was another one of the prophets raised from the dead, like Jeremiah. I think one of them mentions Jeremiah. Maybe that's one of them have been raised from the dead. Or maybe you're just like one of the prophets. God has raised up a new prophet, but he's like those prophets. So that's what people were thinking. Well, they were right in the sense that he was a holy man and a prophet, and someone sent from God, right? They were right about that. He wasn't a fraud. He wasn't an ordinary man. He wasn't just an ordinary man. They were on the right track, that he was someone sent from God. And he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth and saith unto him, thou art the Christ. Thou art the Christ. Now you're the anointed one that we've been looking for, that would come, the son of David, who would establish the throne of God forever, the seed of Abraham that would bless the world. They had a very limited understanding of what the Christ was. Now Matthew's, I better not go into that. Let me stop with this and go back over here. Remember I told you the blind man being healed. There are some people that don't see him at all. There are some people that have a limited vision of him. And there are others that see him clearly. Well, some thought he was a fraud. The Pharisees said he's a fraud. He's nothing. Some said he's a prophet. You're on the right track. You're seeing something. But he was more than that. Peter said, thou art the Christ. Peter had another touch. And Peter knew that he was more than just a prophet. He was the Christ. Now, the reason why I said that a moment ago, they had a limited understanding of the whole concept. They were suspecting that he was Christ, but the Jews had a very limited understanding of who the Christ was. That's why Jesus had to lead them in that. You remember he said, he asked the question to the people, he said, whose son is the Messiah? And they said, well, he's the son of David. He's the descendant, the seed, the descendant. That's what it means by the son. He's the son of David. He said, then why did David, when he was prophesying, call him Lord? Because David said in one of his prophecies, talking about the Messiah, the Lord said to my Lord, the Messiah, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. It was unthinkable for the oldest in the family to come under the younger. The older was always the patriarch of the family. So if the Messiah was simply the seed of David, David would always take priority over the seed because he was before the seed. But Jesus said, but David called him Lord. So he must be more than the seed. He was trying to get them to understand the Messiah is more than the seed of David. he's the Son of God. That's what they didn't understand. But Jesus is giving them an understanding over a period of time that the Messiah and the Son of God are one and the same. That if you believe that he is the Messiah, then you have to believe he's the Son of God. And I can't go into this because it would take too much time, and I'm really not prepared to go into it. But if you look at Jesus' trial, that's one of the reasons they finally said, okay, we've got him on blasphemy because he's claiming to be the Messiah, and if he claims to be the Messiah, by his own statement, the Messiah is the Son of God, so he's claiming to be the Son of God. So when Mark writes here, thou art the Christ, Matthew's account goes into much more detail. Matthew's account says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But the Christ, Jesus was teaching them, and the Son of the living God were one and the same. And then he goes in Matthew into that whole big expounding of the idea of the church. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed art thou, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. None of that's in Mark's account. For whatever reason, the Holy Spirit didn't inspire him to write any of that. Of course, I believe that it's probably because of Mark's initial audience. That the concept of the church, you remember what Jesus said? He said, I have many things to say to you, but not now. You're not ready for them now. So in Mark's audience, in talking about the church and the concept of the church, the Jews would have had a little bit of an understanding of being the Israel of God, the chosen people of God, God's people, the church, the assembly, the holy nation. But the Gentiles, the Greeks, that would have been a foreign concept, that it was going to take some time for them to get it. So if he goes into that here, it may not be that they would have understood what he was saying. That may be why the Lord said, Mark, just stop it right there. Don't go any further. For your audience at that time. See, now later on, the Lord knows all of them are going to be combined, and we're going to have our New Testament. You can compare Mark and Matthew, and you can see what he said in Matthew's account. And as men grew in their understanding, then they would be able to glean all these things Jesus taught in Matthew 16. But to begin with, you can see how that the people of the Gentiles would have had no reference to that, because they didn't understand the whole church in the wilderness. The whole, that's what Israel was. Israel was Stephen called them the church in the wilderness, but they had no concept of what church meant, of it being a holy nation. And so it may be that's why he left all of that out. So he leaves it with Mark saying, thou art the Christ, which encompasses all of that. That means he's the Son of the living God. But that was what he said. And it's the first time Jesus is really saying, okay, guys, that's who I am. Right? They suspected that. They wondered about that. Now he's not holding anything back. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him. Don't tell people that I'm the Messiah. World wasn't ready for that. And here's the thing. Brother Philip says this about the church. He says, what good does it do to go around saying, I'm the church, I'm the church, I'm the church? All it's going to make you look like is that you're proud, prideful, or whatever. You need to show you're the church and display that you're the church. So with Jesus saying, thou art the Christ, he said, just let everything fall into place and it will come to pass that people will understand you are what I am, who I said I was. When he fulfilled all the prophecies and got done with all of it, rose from the dead, then they could show them everything that was happening, and then they would understand. But until that time, they weren't going to understand until he fulfilled all the prophecies that were written of him. So you understand who I am, but don't tell anybody, just wait. And he's going to tell them that because now he's shifted gears. He's getting ready for the crucifixion and what he came into the world to do. And so he's going to tell them these things, and he's going to tell them in the next chapter also, what I'm telling you now, later after I'm risen, you can share with people, but not now. And so he tells them not to tell anyone that he's the Christ. And it says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. In one account it says, they questioned among themselves, what's he talking about rising again? That part just went right over their heads.